right. By myself. All by myself. Yes, I am now. I'm all by myself. Welcome back, everybody, to the Night Off podcast. As you can see, I am all by myself today. And let me tell you, I feel sorry for all of you. We have a lot to go over today. And first and foremost, where's Alex and Walsh? Alex right now is out hunting some witches to bring them to trial. He's going all bounty hunter right now in Massachusetts. And Walsh, well, he was able to phase to an alternate timeline where the dominant species, well, it's still human, but they at least were able to come together and solve one of the world's biggest problems, and that's male pattern baldness. That right there. How's it going? One of these might be true. But in all reality, Walsh is out right now. Alex is on vacation. He is out in Salem having some fun. Hopefully we'll get to see some pictures and stuff next week when he's back. And it's kind of funny because it coincides with Red Letter Media. They just released their ghost hunting expedition, their own adventure, as you would say. And it was at the Villisca Axe Murderer house. It's a pretty good episode. It's a little bit over an hour long. They go to the Villisca Axe Murder house, and in this place they try to find some ghosts. You have to understand everybody's skeptics in this if you haven't ever watched Red Letter Media. It's pretty awesome. They find some things where maybe you could say, oh, maybe that's a ghost, but with a lot of this equipment and stuff where it's hard to actually repeat anything, I don't know. I'm personally a skeptic myself. It could be real. It might not be. You never know. So Mike Stocklasa, one of the guys from RLM, he brings up the Ghost Adventures stuff all the time throughout their stuff. He has a general interest in it. Still a skeptic. Doesn't believe it's real, but likes to watch it. Kind of like a person from Star Trek is going to a new planet and kind of seeing their customs and everything. It's like an adventure overall for him. They find some things. It's kind of fun. Nothing I would really say is actual evidence of ghosts. Just some electronic equipment, basically, that I don't really comprehend, and I don't think many people do, going off. Yeah. Watch the episode, though. It's a lot of fun. The time that they have building up to it and everything and going over it all, it's really intriguing. So yeah, as Alex likes to make fun of, I highly recommend it. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and kind of have to talk about it, is the new series on Netflix, the docuseries Mr. McMahon. Goes over the life of Mr. McMahon, Vince McMahon, the used to be owner of WWE, luckily not, but there's 6 episodes altogether. I figured we would touch on the first 2 today. There's a lot in each episode, so it's a little bit better if I go over with the rest of it with the boys, but I figure I'll give you guys the first 2 today. We got to talk about this. It's hitting the airwaves. Everybody's kind of glued to their screen about this and picking it apart, and I figure, why can't I? So we start with Vince, Mr. McMahon, sitting in a wrestling ring, and he's getting ready to be interviewed. And at that same time, it kind of segues in between different clips of other people sitting down, getting ready to be interviewed. I mean, you've got Cody Rhodes, the undisputed WWE champion right now. You've got The Rock. You've got Steve Austin. You've got Shane McMahon. You've got Trish Stratus. You've got a ton of these people, Bret Hart, that are ready to be interviewed. And we hear off-screen voices saying that Vince is like the P.T. Barnum of wrestling. We hear Vince say to everybody that nobody really knows him, and he still hasn't quite figured it out himself. While Hulk Hogan then says that nobody truly knows Vince McMahon. Now, I feel like we all kind of know each other ourselves, but not completely, because we're always learning new things that we're capable of, new things that we didn't see in ourselves before. Maybe it's like a ability to, I don't know, parkour, something like that. You know what I mean? I think we're always learning about ourselves, but I do find it weird that he seems to say that he knows very little about himself. This first episode, honestly, it goes over the beginnings of Vince. And before this interview can end, the Janelle Grant stuff had come to light, and it kind of halted the production at that point. Because as I've been told before, this was leaning in towards just like a docuseries about McMahon and some of the controversies and everything. And as he stated himself, he believes it's more of like a hit piece now. And it's hard not to talk about the Janelle Grant situation and only make a background like fluff piece. You can't do that, and especially not in the middle of production. Things are going to have to change. They did, and let me tell you, I've only watched 3 episodes altogether. It's wild. It is wild. Now this cuts into us meeting Ted Mann, who is a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, and he says it all started with a tip that McMahon took advantage of a former employee. And he was told that the tip itself was only scratching the surface. Then we go to Joe Palazzo. He's also a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and he says that the story in June 2022 kicked off a series of events that led to another NDA, some government investigations, Vince stepping down, Vince returning, Vince selling the company, and the lawsuit with all the graphic things that Vince has been accused of. This actually led to Vince resigning in January 28th, I believe it was, of 2024. Yes, January 28th, 2024. Looking at my notes here. And that is the Janelle Grant lawsuit. We've covered it before in the podcast, so if you need to, check it out. I don't remember what episode it is off the top of my head. I'm sure maybe Editing Derek can put it in the description or something. We'll see. Now, I do want to make it clear that the majority of these interviews, including most of Vince's actual interviews, were filmed before the sexual misconduct allegations were made public. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this first episode is Vince says that he wishes he could tell us all the real stories because holy shit. But saying he'll give us enough so that it's semi-interesting. He doesn't want anyone to actually know the real him. You know, it's kind of hard because when it comes to wrestling, kayfabe for many is first and foremost. And it's hard to probably break that at times where you don't want to let out everything in the business because it'll probably make you look like a monster. But I feel like we kind of get a window into Vince in this interview because he's not used to being in this kind of position where he's being asked questions, position where he's trying to talk about himself but not let things loose. And I think more gets let out than he actually realizes, especially like in this first episode. But at that point, it cuts to the opening with the credits and everything. And as it rolls back in, Vince starts talking about his relationship with his father. He didn't know his dad until he was 12 years old. He grew up in a trailer park in North Carolina with his mom and a very abusive stepdad. Now, understand that in this time frame, he never actually spoke to his father a single time in those first 12 years of him growing up. It was radio silence. And when he did actually finally get to meet his father, he explained that there was like a glow around him because, you know, happy to see your actual dad, all of the mishandling and everything that's happening from the stepfather and the abuse that's going on. It's easy to see why seeing an alternative and immediately thinking it's going to be better. But he ran up expecting a hug and instead got a little pat on the back. And he said, "That was different." Let me tell you, that kind of, I don't know. In the times back then, I don't know how loving fathers were necessarily. This was a long, long time ago. I think the 60s at this point. But you would think that at the very least, he would give his son a hug. Now, maybe that's just not the type of man that Vince or McMahon Sr. was. I don't know a whole lot about the guy. Alex probably could explain a lot more than I would. But Vince does talk about how he fell in love with his dad very quickly. We then cut to Linda McMahon talking about a young Vince McMahon. She talks about Vince in the business and how he's always just wanted to be in it ever since he met his father. Vince bothered his dad enough to let him work for him that he sent him to work in the northernmost part of his territory, which is Bangor, Maine. I didn't know this place existed, but that's quite a fucking name. But he did a great job out there, and honestly, it actually impressed his father, which he don't know if he told him that, but at the very least, it did impress him. In this episode, we also find out about Vince's very first time being a commentator, so like an announcer. They were on TV, or going to be on TV, and the announcer wanted more money, basically holding Senior by the cojones. And instead of giving in, he just said, "You know what, screw it, I'm not going to pay this guy a bunch of money, I'm just going to make my son do it." So we get audio of Vince doing his very first announcement in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, and this was in 1976. And you even hear him say, like, "Hey Dad, is this quick enough?" It was really bad, and even Bruce Pritchard said he was a horrible commentator, but he had a way with emotion, and he told stories. Vince learned early on about how you need to tell a story between good versus evil, face versus heel, and kind of explain to the audience what is happening in the ring, but give it some bravado and give it some gusto about it. This episode also lets us in on the kind of a history lesson of wrestling. It kind of goes into the territory system. Before, it was all just one big conglomerate of WWE. And when you look at the map, Vince had the WWE, back then WWF, in the Northeast territory, so like New England, basically. And during this time, you kind of didn't cross into other people's territories. You had WWE in there, you had AWA doing their thing, which I believe was in Michigan, potentially. I could be wrong on that, but there was quite a few different territories, each with their own wrestling federation. And you didn't cross the line. You didn't go into other people's territories and start promoting your own stuff, at least not without permission. Vince, being the new guy in town, he didn't care about that. So he just went into these territories and just started promoting the WWE, because to him these lines were imaginary. Vince Sr., though, he was very much against it and told Vince not to rock the boat. And they even talked about how other promoters were going to his father and saying that he was gonna be found at the bottom of a river. Now, Vince, always trying to act like the hard ass, said that he didn't care because they didn't actually own anything, and he was competing with them, not trying to hurt them or anything like that. This comes back. Let me tell you, this comes back. This mindset of his, of this is just competing. This isn't me trying to be personal. It's all just business. It comes back later on in this documentary. Now, if you are wondering how Vince kind of went into these areas and really kind of screwed the pooch on all of them, he would go in and he would steal the top talent in each of these places and then go back to those areas and run them against them with their former stars. The documentary does a great job of showing various wrestlers cutting promos that were with their original territory, and then cutting to their new promos in WWE, WWF at that time. He says he wasn't taking anything away from anyone, that he was just building it as this was America and you can't compete with them, then tough. I don't know, man. I don't, get me wrong. He kind of built the way that it's viewed nowadays. Because when you think of wrestling, WWE is, what you think of initially. But gosh, this is just evil. It's just evil. And it really proves just the kind of guy that he is. You know what I mean? He goes into these places, he takes their top talent just because outbidding, then runs shows in there with the old talent, maybe a new name, maybe slightly different. And he goes, oh, it's on you if you can't compete with me. So we also see during this time that Senior had Bob Backlund as the champion for the then WWF. And Vince talks about how he was too milquetoast for his liking. So he's looking for someone with more charisma. And at first he tries out Dusty Rhodes, who really didn't like the vision that Vince had and didn't think it was actually possible. It's actually Cody who talks about this portion here about his father. I can understand it. You're used to seeing it one way with the territories and kind of trying to see. Hopefully that doesn't get picked up. But trying to see this vision of just one single federation kind of going all across the country and being one big ticket. It's like a monopoly. There's nothing good that comes from monopolies. There's a whole game made of trying to teach you why monopolies are bad. If you didn't understand, the winner is actually the one who does the worst off for everyone, because the point of monopoly is to teach you you're not supposed to have monopolies. But I digress. So Vince obviously is trying to find a new talent to be his champion, and he ends up finding Hulk Hogan. He was working for Senior at one point, and they apparently called him Sterling Golden. I didn't know this. Alex probably did, and I'm assuming a lot of you at home did too. I did not know that his name was Sterling Golden. That's kind of wild to me. It's a horrible name. But 70s, 80s, it's I don't know. It just gives off like creeper mustache vibes, which is obviously what Hulk Hogan had back then with the handlebar mustache. As you know, with the way that, I guess even if you don't know, with the way that wrestling works, at least back then, you didn't really want two faces facing off for a title shot. It didn't, like, the storylines didn't really fit that easily. And both Backlund and Hogan were faces at the time. And so he needed a transitional champion. And we cut to the Iron Sheik, best known probably for his line of "fuck the Hulk Hogan." Vince talks about the Sheik and how he was one of the most disliked heels they ever had. He says there was a lot of nationalism in the nation, in America at the time. There still is. It goes in waves, and we're in a real high point now, like they were in the 80s. But that doesn't mean you actually have to follow nationalism and cut those kind of storylines necessarily, unless you're poking, tongue in cheek, like some have been able to do. So if you don't know, during this time there was the Iran-Contra deal, and there was American hostages in Iran, and basically the fans could pay to watch the Sheik get his ass beat and watch an Iranian get beat up, and it would kind of give them some de-stress, I guess, essentially, be able to act out some of these things and see it. It doesn't age well. Pritchard even says it doesn't age well. But he also brings up that you could say the same thing about many movies that are portraying Germans, Japanese, and even the Russians. Back to the Future is shown of Doc Brown being gunned down. That doesn't age well with the whole Libyan thing. But yeah, Hogan is able to defeat the Iron Sheik and take the belt and just become the top dog in WWE, then WWF at that point. And, you know, this cuts back to Vince, who explains that his dad told him he was proud of him for beating all of these promoters, saying that these weren't really friends of his and fuck them all. Vince explains that this was one of the biggest moments of his life. You start to get the impression that Vince really didn't have a good relationship with his father. It was very much, I'm speculating here, obviously, from how much I've seen, but it comes across that his relationship was almost purely business with his son for a long time. Maybe he didn't really see him as a true heir at all. I do think that's touched on later on, which, you know, we will go over. But then Senior dies at the age of 69, and Vince says that the day before his dad told him that he loved him for the very first time, which adds into the idea that their relationship wasn't good and his dad just wasn't really proud of him for a long time. It was the only time he ever said it to him, and Vince said it felt so good, and you see him get a little bit emotional, and he says he really cared and loved his dad. And it does this like hard cut to Tony Atlas, who says, I don't really think he liked his father, to be honest with you. And I gotta tell you, that edit is fucking perfect. I fucking cackled at that point. This shit was like just fucking stream hard cut. Just nope. Gotta. Even though you get to hear Vince, you got to hear an alternative outside perspective of how they viewed their relationship, which is where I would probably garner more truth from, to be honest with you. Tony goes on to explain that every idea that Vince had more or less drove his father up the wall. And also a lot of the wrestlers that were in the back as well up the wall, because a lot of this stuff really wasn't wrestling at the time. This was more entertainment. This was trying to have the business grow and adapt with the population itself and the culture itself, because wrestling at the end of the day, in many ways, it reflects the culture in which it's being represented, in which this case is America, United States, if you will. Senior wasn't willing to accept, though, the changes, and Atlas kind of explains that this is more than likely where they always butted heads, and it wasn't until near the very end where Senior actually did care about his son and actually saw this all kind of working out. Oh, actually, I'm an idiot. It's actually Paul Heyman, who said that his father had a unwillingness to accept it. There's a lot of information that gets thrown out at you very quickly, and if you're really bad at reading notes like me, then this is what you get. Now we get to where Vince comes up with WrestleMania. Vince is convinced to take a vacation. He goes to the Caribbean for a couple days, and in that time he comes up with the concept of WrestleMania, in the sense of like how the NFL has the Super Bowl or the Oscars or the World Cup, you know, the championship, the end of the season kind of thing. Linda kind of jokes that Vince ended up not actually taking a vacation, but just thinking about the business at all times, because he can't stop thinking about the business. And I think that's probably very indicative of the type of person that he is, because I feel like he's always striving to try and be accepted by his father. I don't think even his father telling him he loved him in the end was enough to like scratch that itch, I guess. Because he's going to keep going on to do better and better and better and better. And I mean, you could almost look at it as like a psychosis. It's kind of wild because I mean, it's how a lot of business people are. You know, you got to do better year after year, make more money year after year. There's no just plateau where you're like, hey, this is enough. And Vince is not one of those people, as this docuseries clearly shows. But we go into the John Stossel interview. Part of the media blitz involved him. He was working for ABC 2020 at the time, and he was set to interview some of the wrestlers. Hogan goes on to speak and say that that Stossel was there to see if Hogan was as popular as everyone claimed, but asked him if wrestlers were cutting their heads with blades. Blading is the term that's used. Hogan said it was barbaric and tried to laugh it off, and even showed like some of the scars that he had on his head at the time. But after speaking with Stossel, he ran to Vince and explained that Stossel was trying to see if wrestling was fake, and he was out to get at the business. Now, this is all speculation because nobody really wants to say the truth. But there is speculation that Vince had demanded that something be done to Stossel. In this docuseries, though, they do say that he didn't tell us to do it, but that he said he wished someone would do it. I'm going to let you be the judge of that. I feel like there's some kayfabe being put on, a little bit of mysticism being covered, a little bit of cloak and all that. I have a feeling he told someone to do it, to hurt this man and make him pay for trying to show the inner workings of wrestling. Because during this time, there was still very much the idea of you need to keep kayfabe. And kayfabe was important above all else. Kayfabe is you keeping in on the con while the con is being done. Everyone just plays in on it and believes whatever the situation is real. That's why you see a lot of these storylines go across where you can have the Hulk Hogan face off against The Rock, and have them both switch between being a face and a heel and back to into face again in one single match. It's pretty cool. But this is where you get David Schultz coming in and talking with him and asking him, is this fake? And he slaps the piss out of him and knocks him to the ground. Now, it wasn't right. I mean, come on, it wasn't right to do. You shouldn't have hit him. Maybe threaten him a little bit, just a little. No, you don't even do that. You just laugh it off and ask him if he wants to step inside the ring and see how fake it really is, and kind of show him what it's like to hit the ropes and maybe take a chop under, supervision, of course. But I don't know. Maybe it could have gone differently had it not had such an air of let's threaten this man's life. We wouldn't have gotten the story we have right now with this, but maybe Stossler wouldn't have been injured and had to file suit at that point. We cut into Meltzer, though, saying that Vince had told the story that if WrestleMania were to fail, that he would be left in financial ruin. And Meltzer says it's very possibly true. Stephanie McMahon talks about this and says that Vince and Linda had mortgaged everything that they had owned and bet it all on WrestleMania. Whereas Shane says he was a teenager at the time and didn't really know the family finances. But he did say that Vince just kept telling him that everything was going to work out. Again, take this with a grain of salt. I don't know. It's probably very true because everything was still very much in a fragile state, even though he was in WWE was very much in an upward trajectory still at the time. Because having a giant main event like this was groundbreaking for wrestling in general. And it was a way to connect people who might not watch wrestling, but might, be interested if they see that it's hitting such popularity that there's pay-per-view events being done, you know, you got to jump on that offer. You got to make that bread. I get it. So everything exploded after WrestleMania. And wrestling kind of entered into its golden age, where you had big behemoths that were on the screen at all time. Wrestling became mainstream, basically. It was cool to say, I watch wrestling, as they say in the docuseries, and it's very true. You were starting to see a lot of advertisements for toys and such starting to come out. A lot of the plush toys were starting to come out in the 80s. And I mean, even Sports Illustrated had featured Hulk Hogan on the cover after WrestleMania. This kind of ends, though, episode 1 with speaking about this. We cut into episode 2, which starts to get into more of the controversies of what's happening in the WWE, then WWF and its orbit. This episode starts off with Vince singing Stand Back at the Slammies. We've used that bit before, talked about it a little bit. It's freaking hilarious. I don't know what was on his... I mean, it had to be cocaine, right? Like, it was cocaine that got him to want to do the Slammies and have this big old song and dance. And I don't know, maybe he watched the Super Bowl Shuffle and said, hey, you know what? I gotta have that. Let's do it. Episode 2 kind of talks a lot about, in the beginning, about how wrestlers were working 7 nights a week. Jimmy Hart is the one who kind of notes that it was a hard grind, and even Bret the Hitman Hart wanted kind of just a few more days off a year. Meltzer says they could have managed the schedule better, and in the late 80s it was a disaster. He continued that the schedule nowadays isn't so bad because the wrestlers are guaranteed a contract, so they're guaranteed a certain amount of shows a year, a certain amount of money as long as they fulfill the show requirement. They don't have as much pressure to work while they're injured. And in the 80s, you pretty much, if you wanted to make money, you needed to take painkillers or some sort of pain relieving medicine. I think the stuff nowadays is a lot stronger. I think with the regimented healing program, you can get back into the ring a lot quicker versus having to work 7 days a week. But when you're working for a business tyrant like Vince McMahon, you know, you're not probably really seen as human, but more as a puppet at that point. So whether the toy is hurt or not, the show must go on. We get to hear about WrestleMania 2, and Vince and Dave were arguing over attendance. We don't really get an exact kind of number. It's like between 72,000 and like 60 something thousand. I don't remember the exact number. I didn't write it down in my notes. Yeah, it was a lot of people. But this one kind of had the idea of like being in, it would be 3 shows in 3 cities, but in a single day. And I mean, obviously, it was a disaster, but Vince can't be everywhere at once, and they highlight that. And I mean, honestly, it still went off overall really well. It still did better than WrestleMania 1 in terms of viewership, I believe, even though WrestleMania 1 is deemed as the superior, which, you know, sequels are never always, I shouldn't say never, aren't always as good as the original. But Vince said he was never going to do that again. It was a really bad idea. It's really hard to, especially back then, to be streaming from 3 different places at one time, be able to cut feeds from across the country when needed. And you can't do that. Not back then. Nowadays you can. Nowadays it's a lot easier because basically you're just pressing a button, and switch is over. But back then, man, like you had these big giant things to work with, and it was a hassle. It was a hassle. Not like I was alive back then. I wasn't, I don't think. Maybe. WrestleMania 3. And I just realized that this is the one that had the attendance issue. Don't you wish Derek could read his notes properly? Again, with this one, they talk about the attendance. It's somewhere as high as 72,000, I think, and as low as like 60 something thousand. Take it what you will. It was probably closer into like the 60s or high 50s or something like that. I don't remember what the exact number was. But this went on in Michigan. And the biggest highlight of WrestleMania 3 is Hogan versus Andre the Giant. It's billed as the first time anyone has body slammed Andre the Giant, if you believe Hulk Hogan, which is not true. The first time it's seen done. It's been done at house shows and stuff. It's not the first time. But, Hogan and truth, oil, water. Right after WrestleMania 3 is when Hogan started to wanting to branch out his career, though. He wanted to start doing movies. And Vince was not ready to lose Hogan to Hollywood. So he figured, well, I'll just pitch my own idea. I don't think it's hard to believe that Vince didn't know anything about movies. Duh. But he figured, why not just sit down with Hogan and write one together? At least as the story goes. There's been rumors about a cabin in the woods and maybe a little bit of cocaine. But the end result, we got No Holds Barred. And the docuseries actually shows the Dookie line. And oh my God. If any of you have not seen No Holds Barred, you need to watch that. It's cinema, all right. It is cinema. It's wild. It's bad, but if you're like a Red Letter Media fan, then you understand that sometimes really bad movies are still worth watching. Now we get into the part of the episode, the second episode, where they bring up the steroid scandal. During this time, the audience was starting to get a little sick of Hulk Hogan and his role as the American hero. And there was whispers, I guess you could say, starting to go about of a doctor prescribing steroids to wrestlers. That was Dr. George Zahorian, it turns out. Vince says that he was appointed by the PA State Athletic Commission to cover WWE shows, then WWF. And they had no voice in who was appointed. I get the feeling if some palms were greased, you can kind of get the guy that you want to get. In this case, Dr. George Zahorian, who was a not so great individual. He basically, when he was in the locker room with the guys, he would sell steroids to them, to the wrestlers. Hogan said it was part of the norm for everyone in sports and Hollywood, and everyone was just taking them to become like larger than life, which is true. Many of your action stars were huge. Many of your wrestlers were huge, and not in a way that you see these Marvel actors becoming, which is through regiment and such, and it doesn't look so disproportionate to their body types. Even Bret Hart says that the doctor would check everyone before the match and then ask what they needed and sell them the steroids, because as Vince says in it, it wasn't illegal at the time to sell steroids, but it was illegal to prescribe them. Pritchard says that this was because of the changes that happened under the Reagan administration. The docuseries even cuts to Reagan talking about it being made illegal and made a Class 3 substance. And it kind of ruined the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation, that Vince was trying to put out at the time. Because obviously bodybuilding is never going to be rife with steroid use in the 80s. Yeah. Vince said it wasn't a good time, as all bodybuilders did was take steroids, so he decided to fold the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. He was getting all kinds of heat during that time and felt like he was getting hit from all sides. Zahorian testified later that he treated Hogan for a serious steroid abuse problem, and Vince was pressured into steroid testing, and he went onto the air saying that the WWE, then WWF, would be drug-free. He admitted to taking steroids at one time, and the WWE, then WWF, would be the standard for drug-free and for drug testing facilities. That same day, Hogan appeared on Arsenio Hall, though. Vince told Hogan to come clean, but Hogan denied and said he'd only taken the steroids 3 times. This was later refuted, though, by Billy Graham and David Schultz, telling the news that they both shot up Hulk Hogan personally with steroids, completely refuting his claims of only 3 times. He later then came out and said that he was self-destructing and that he should have listened to Vince at the time and just came fully clean and just take the heat that comes with it. I happen to agree with that. I think that if he had just come clean the first time, it would have been a lot better off for him. But we wouldn't have had such a hilarious story of him having to backtrack and come fully clean just days later. This episode also brings into question how many in the locker room would be seen as some of the worst human beings on the face of the earth. He talked about how there was a ton of abuse going on towards women, using them as toys, like Jimmy Snuka. Meltzer kind of talks about back in 1983 where something happened in a hotel in Allentown between Snuka and his girlfriend. She hit her head and died, and the person who investigated it felt it might have been a homicide, but no charges were filed, and people still think to this day that Vince had a hand in that, I being one of them. We might go back over that whole story sometime in detail, but just know that she somehow hit her head, and it was in such a way where you would not expect a human being to be able to do that to themselves. Yeah. Phil Pritchard starts talking about the darker side of wrestling and the Ring Boy scandal. Mel Phillips would bring underage boys, ring boys as they were called, to the shows, and they would be sexually harassed and abused. Even Brett comments on this and says that Mel Phillips was a total PDF file, who wouldn't hire ring crew unless they would do sexual favors for him. Phil learned it involved Terry Gavin as well, who was the executive in Connecticut, and Pat Patterson. Pritchard says the business was homophobic and Pat was openly gay, but became a top guy everywhere he went. We get news footage of Tom Cole saying Pat Patterson would pat him on the butt and grab his testicles. Garvin offered him cocaine and propositioned him as well. He refused to have sex and was let go from the company at 16. Phil says at best Vince was guilty of rank neglect. I happen to disagree with that. I get the feeling, after knowing all the stuff we know with Janelle Grant, that he knew about this. I get the feeling maybe he didn't take part, but he was very likely already doing a lot at this time to people. And so I get the feeling that there was like a mutual agreement. Speculation, though. Speculation. I gotta say, speculation. But there was one truth about this, though. Kids were being abused under Vince's watch, and nothing was being done. I do have to say Brett does come out and say that something may have happened, but there's probably no way to prove it. I think that's bullshit. I think there is probably enough corroborating evidence amongst the victims that you could get a timeline of events and be able to prove things. But you know, that costs money and takes effort. So who wants to do that? We do get a crazy moment with Atlas saying they all knew that Pat was doing this stuff, and he alleged that Pat would grab his his dick, his pecker. You actually get to hear the producer behind the camera ask why no one ever complained about this, and Atlas is like, to who? Who is who? He's the booker. He's number 2 in the company. And the producer still, you know, pushes further and goes, Vince. And Atlas nearly chokes while he's laughing. And he says he needed Pat more than he needed me, which says a lot, which makes me believe that, you know, there was a mutual understanding between what these two monsters were doing while they were going from show to show to show. And that I scratch your back so you scratch mine. We don't tell nobody about each other's business and everything's good. Now, during this time, the reaction from like legitimate media sources was dismissive, to say the least. And the only ones that kind of jumped on this scandal was like the Donahue show. Vince states that he's one of the few people who likes confrontation, and so he went on the Donahue show and stood up for himself. He doesn't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea, but he did it because Vince admits that he very much lives a life of no regrets. I don't believe him, but that's what he says. We'll see how true that is. Now we get into some more of the juicy stuff. Moving on beyond all this stuff. Jimmy Hart is asked about the various backstage relationships going on in the WWE. And you can tell he wants to be cautious because he doesn't know who cares about what is being let out into the open. But Brett gives literally 0 fucks about this and just brings up Rita Marie, who was the first female referee, the first woman referee. Vince was accused of the big ol' R word, the graping, and denies that it ever happened. You see Rita go on the Geraldo Rivera show and give details of what Vince did to her during her time there, and it sounds eerily similar to the Janelle Grant situation, except she had a limit of what she was willing to do and had to walk away from this. She said she had to satisfy Vince to keep her $1 million contract. Vince claims it was consensual. So he is, at the very least, he is admitting adultery because he was married to his wife still at the time, still married. But there was a God, this is horrible. Because he says once you're accused of rape, you're a rapist. But he makes this comment about how even if it was rape, the statute of limitations had run out. And I don't know if this man understands how telling that is. You're basically admitting to doing it and saying, well, you know what? I'm a free man. Time has run out. You can't get me for it anymore. So too bad, so sad. I don't understand why billionaires are allowed to get away with the stuff they're allowed to get away with. But I mean, this is a textbook example of someone who is too big to be put away at the time. Too big. Side note, Vince also sued her and Geraldo Rivera. And the public turned on her, calling her a gold digger, because in this country, it's very hard to believe a victim. They tend to victim blame right away. It happens all the time. Even after things have come out to prove that they are victims, people still like to victim blame. It's disgusting. I tend to believe you should believe the victim first, and then if news comes to light that contradicts and fully discredits the story, then you go from there. But until then, believe the fucking victim. Now we go back into the steroids, and the federal government starts coming for Vince. And Vince blames Phil about this. Phil says he was an FBI informant and that he would read what he wrote and they would read what he wrote and they would act on it. The indictments, though, they only came in about the steroid charges. There was nothing about the Ring Boy or Rita scandals, and Vince entered in a very easy not guilty plea. He called the federal government the biggest bullies because they have unlimited resources. They make people cop to a plea, and Vince was like, fuck yourself. Which I admit, it takes some fucking cojones to stand up to the federal government and say, fuck yourself. But they basically had him dead to fucking rights on this. Dead to rights. I mean, they even show in this where Vince starts wearing a neck brace going into the courtroom to maybe garner sympathy. A lot of people were saying that the surgery didn't need to happen. He says it did. I tend to believe it didn't need to happen, but it is also brought up how heels would wear a neck brace to exaggerate the injuries they sustained from facing off against someone they lost or maybe just eked out a victory from, and it was a way to get the crowd to boo them because, you know, being exaggerative about your injuries and acting like a little baby. I don't know which way this kind of swung the populace. I would like to think that they thought he was milking it because it seems kind of obvious, but hindsight's 2020. In the wake of all of this steroid stuff and it being on the news all the time, Hulk Hogan did notice that the crowd started to turn on him and started to boo him. He wasn't in control of how the crowd would view or see him anymore, and he found it very unsettling. So unsettling that he decided that he needed to leave the WWE and pursue a career in acting. This saw Hogan's last match in WWE at WrestleMania 8. Brett even says that people don't really understand truly how dire that situation was at the time, because the WWE, then WWF, looked extremely weak, and competition could pounce in that moment and capitalize and start to take over the number one slot. And this is where we cut to seeing Ted Turner, who was one of the pioneers of cable television and was one of the first to broadcast pro wrestling nationwide. We get to see Eric Bischoff, who says that they were the number 2 in wrestling, but they might as well have been number 202 because of how wide the gap actually was between the two entities. He says before he was hired that WCW was basically just a cheap ripoff of WWE, then WWF. But he noticed that there was an opportunity after the steroid trials and Hogan leaving the WWE. He approached Hogan actually while he was filming Thunder in Paradise. You should check that out for sure. And Hogan talks about in this that he missed wrestling really, really badly and was tired of being stuck in a trailer 24/7 without being able to see people in between shooting different scenes for either the show or movie, which is bullshit. I think he just realized he's really, really, really bad at it and just really, really wanted to go back to what he knew how to do, which was wrestling, because that's the industry he was in. Eric offers him a contract, and Hogan says that he doesn't want to work as much or as hard as he did in the WWE. And Bischoff and Ted Turner agree to that and allow him to work less days and make basically a lot more money, essentially. Make that bread. We also learned that Hogan had said to Vince that he would never run against him, basically work for competition against him, which bullshit, because obviously he went from WWE to a semi-failed movie / Hollywood career back to wrestling, but now in WCW. And Vince was actually very hurt by this. And Shane even brings up in this that he saw it as a slap in the face and still views it that way to this day. So there is some animosity there, but obviously he's the son. He was not in control. With the way things are now, he's not in control. So I wonder if he had ever taken over back then, what he would have done to Hogan while he had returned to WWE during the Attitude Era. But Pritchard does go on to talk about how Hogan was offered that better deal, and with the trial hanging over the WWF, there was a very good chance that Vince and the WWF might not be around much longer. So why not take the opportunity where it comes up, where you can work less hours and make more money and not have to worry so much about where you came from, because it no longer exists. We cut back into where we learn that the government wanted Hogan to be their star witness. And he said that he was told that if he didn't go along with it, they would turn their attention to him. And he was looking at it probably 17 years or more. Meltzer kind of backed this up a little bit and says that Hogan didn't want to testify against Vince, but the government made him. Take that with a grain of salt. I really don't know. I get the feeling maybe he was meant to be like a high-end witness, but not necessarily the star witness or anything. Because you never fully know how a witness is going to testify until they're up on the stand and testifying in the moment. We also kind of learned that Hogan was granted immunity from this, and he said he knew what he was going to say from the get-go. Which this is what leads us out, is this moment here of this episode. And we do get to see some quotes that state that Vince withdrew his defamation case against Rita Chatterton and Geraldo Rivera in 1994. And I mean, like I said, it's only 2 episodes that I'm covering today, but it's heavy. There is a lot to go over. I'm looking at the time right now, and we've gone over quite a bit. And each of these episodes are like an hour each. You should watch it. It's on Netflix right now. There's 6 episodes altogether. It'll take you about 6 hours to watch it. Next week, we are definitely going to be covering the other 4 episodes. We might have to speed through them a little bit. But because of the banter and stuff, it won't be that hard to do. I think we should kind of desensitize, though, and like cleanse the palate a little bit. Let's talk about some actual real-time wrestling news with Raw and Smackdown that happened this past week and what's leading us into Bad Blood. So starting off with Raw, the 23rd of September, we had quite a few things going on in this episode of Raw. It was a great episode. But we found out that the ante's being up between Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan at Bad Blood. They'll be facing off against each other, but it looks like Dominic Mysterio is going to be suspended above the ring in a fucking shark cage. I know that he's not what Rhea's going after in this, because this is not exactly the ladder match for who gets custody. But I feel like if Rhea gets a chance to get him out of there, she's literally going to drown him. Like, literally drown him. This was a great little back and forth, and it was nice to get a little bit more heat for this match, because I needed a little bit more heat going into this. I'm excited for that, but it was a nice little promo spot, which led us right into Sami Zayn versus Ludwig Kaiser. Now, this was a really good match. We got to see some top-notch wrestling from both Sami, as per usual, and from Kaiser. These two did a lot of back and forth. We got to see some amazing counters, and we got to see how indomitable Sami Zayn truly is. But this one ended with Sami connecting with a German suplex and was able to actually deliver the hell of a kick and eke out that victory. This is going to lead more into Sami eventually earning that title shot against Gunther, because I do believe that Sami is going to strip the belt from Gunther. The boys might disagree with me, but I happen to believe that. Next up, we had Dragon Lee versus Carlito. This one was okay. I'd give it like a 2.5 out of 5 star. There's not a whole lot to really talk about. Lee was able to pin Carlito. But I don't know. This one left me wanting more. Check it out. Then we were supposed to get The Miz versus Bronson Reed, but Braun Strowman attacked, and their fight began again. Like, it's never ended. They brawled in the ring. They were throwing security around. I mean, if this is a way to sell two monsters that I believe are just gonna beat the ever living hell out of each other. We've seen it multiple times already, but I think once we get into Bad Blood, this is going to be probably one of the best matches of it. It'd be probably one of my favorites. That's speculation, but with how this has been being sold so far, I'm freaking loving it. We got Drew McIntyre responding to CM Punk, who also had to talk about how his family doesn't want him to do this match, but that he'll see him in Hell in a Cell. I'm excited. I like how these guys are taking this more like serious approach. I mean, McIntyre even said, "I promise I am going to make you bleed a lot." I believe him. Punk, very much a Stretch Armstrong, and when you stretch a skin out, cuts happen real easy. There's going to be some blood. He kind of echoed this common theme of how Punk is bad for business. He's bad for the locker room, and just in general, he wants his ass out of the WWE. I feel like this is going to be the actual final match between the two that settles this rivalry once and for all, and allow these two to start moving on to bigger and greater things now that they're done with each other. It's been an amazing rivalry, both in and out of the ring, but I think this is going to be the end cap. We also got Damage Control versus Unholy Union, which was a decent match overall. Got to see some great action between the two teams, and as you might have expected, Damage Control was able to eke out the win against Unholy Union. We then get the New Day versus American Made. You know, I gotta say, this new kind of storyline with New Day has got me hooked. It has me in fear that they are going to break up still. But this did end with a defeat of the New Day by American Made. We got to see a little bit afterwards where Woods is frustrated again, like we did the previous week. The LWO and Rey Mysterio come out and try and talk to them, and it just really doesn't sit well with them. So it ends with Mysterio and Xavier having a one-on-one match being lined up. We then end Raw with one of the best matches I have seen on regular television in a while, and that was the Intercontinental Championship match between Jey Uso and Braun Breaker. From beginning to end, this match was crazy. It was still, even though a longer match, like I think 20 minutes, it still was quick. Just everything was high and fast paced. The win here out of Jay, it was needed. I was really happy because, we all got to yeet every once in a while. I'm happy to finally see a singles belt being put on Jay. I honestly believe this is the setup for bringing Braun into challenging for the heavyweight championship belt, which I do believe he will take. I still have the theory that after Sammy defeats Gunther for it, that is when Braun will then beat Sammy for it, and we'll start having a little bit of poetry going on, a little bit of repeating. Then we cut to that promo between Roman and Cody. Wow. And it's, just as goosebump inducing as ever. Really love those two on the camera. This was shot perfectly. This is like literal cinema, in my opinion. But it really kind of shows the stakes between these two and how they kind of feel about each other. I'm still getting major Goku and Vegeta vibes out of this. This is very DBZ feeling to me, and I'm really hoping they kind of progress this that way where they can have some sort of mutual respect one day. But the first match that we actually get is between Bayley and Naomi. This is a great match. I do wish we did get to see Naomi's full entrance though. But we did get to see an amazing dive out of the ring where she does this crazy barrel roll right off the top rope. It was amazing. Overall, I would give this one like a 3.5 star, probably maybe almost 4. It was a great match. Bayley ends up eking out the victory to be able to go on to challenge Nia. We also get to see a spot where Nia ends up choking Tiffany Stratton, and it was very vicious. And that led into, after the match, Tiffany linking up with Naomi and talking with her as the camera cut away. So I'm assuming they're going to have some talks about how to help ensure that Nia loses, because I'm sorry, you don't choke someone. You just don't do that. Not without consent. Always with consent. We also then got the next in the series of Andrade versus Carmelo. I'm starting to lose interest in this, I admit. It was an okay match overall. It was nice having a lead in with LA Knight with all this, and having LA Knight come in mid-ring and kind of screw over Andrade. It's a way to refresh this, because there was, prior to that, some respect between Andrade and LA Knight. There might still be afterwards, but I need something to happen with this. I need some sort of conclusion, because I like both wrestlers, but I want to see them start facing other people more now. I'm tired of this ongoing series back and forth. This isn't baseball. It's not baseball. SmackDown also had Mishin versus Piper Niven. This was an okay match. It could have gone quicker. I think this should have been maybe just a few minutes long. We did hear Michael Cole say a whole new way to nug, which I don't really know what that means. But we did get to see a nice crucifix bomb out of this match. I don't know. I was left kind of wanting more. We then cut to the Randy Orton, Kevin Owens versus Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu match. This overall was good. Right before it started, we find out that, Kevin Owens doesn't want Cody ringside because he still has some heat going on with Cody overall. It's probably likely to do with Roman. He storms off, and the Viper, Randy Orton, asks if he would still come ringside if shit hits the fan. We get a great match out of the two teams, as you would expect. As the Bloodline always does, they have their other members come out to interfere, which leads Cody then coming out. And unfortunately, it still ended up with the Bloodline winning. Not to say Cody messed things up or anything like that, but it did kind of put a wrench in everything with how Kevin might feel after being told that all they do is lose, so that's why they're bringing Roman in. But we do get to see them hug it out after Randy kind of forces a hug to happen between the two. I feel like we're going to end up actually going to need some sort of finalization, some insurances from Cody about Roman coming in, because like DBZ, people were not happy when Vegeta started coming around more often. but there was a need for it. So I have a feeling that's what's going to end up happening. All that is going to be leading into next week with Bad Blood. I do want to go over real quickly what the overall matchups are going to look like in this, of what we know so far with the lineup. We've got CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre, Hell in a Cell. Cannot wait for it. I think it's going to be great. We've got Damian Priest versus Finn Balor. Hopefully to start showing once and for all that the Terror Twins deserve to be standing out on top. We have the World Championship match between Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley, with Dirty Dominic Mysterio being suspended above the ring in a shark cage. I think that's going to be fucking hilarious. We've got Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns versus Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu. I do believe we are going to see a Cody and Roman Reigns victory out of this one. I'm happy to see these two work together. I get the feeling it's going to start off real rocky, but it's going to end up real strong once they figure it out. Then we're also going to have, for the WWE Women's Championship belt, Nia Jax versus Bayley. I don't think Bayley's going to take the belt. What I think, honestly, my personal opinion, and we'll end up talking about this next week. We'll see if I'm right or not, but I feel like Bayley's going to just lose. Or actually, you know what? Two things can be true at the same time. Or one of the two things is going to happen. Either she's going to beat Nia or she's going to lose to Nia. But either way, Tiffy is going to be cashing in at Bad Blood. I'm saying it now. And I feel like we're going to have some major Tiffy time with her as the new champion leading in all the way up to WrestleMania. She'll be an in-between champion because it's going to be, some time for her to grow. I think it's going to be great. And we also are going to have the Battle of the Giants match, I believe it's called, which, they're these monsters of mayhem in the ring. Braun Strowman and Big Bronson Reed. They are literally promoting them as like King Kong and Godzilla, and I'm here for it. I think this might literally be the best match of the night, like I said earlier. I want to know what you think, though. Let me know down in the comments below. But if you liked what you saw today, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It greatly helps out. Check out our merch down in the links down below for all of our new shirts that come out. I'm not wearing one right now. I'm doing laundry. I'm sorry. I'm by myself. I kind of had to put things together. But I do have to say, I lasted a lot longer today than I have prior. I think I'm getting used to this whole by myself thing. Derek, don't sing all by myself again, please. And until next time, Night Shift, have a good night.